All right, so Fnatic basically got turbo bodied recently against Genji, complete 3-0. But it's really weird because I think from a draft perspective, I really like and wanted to point out some of the takes that Fnatic had in terms of draft and how Genji kind of responded in kind with their own sort of unique style. Both teams are playing and strategizing that they're really confident and they're playing to win. They're not playing to lose, and I think that's really cool. And I wanted to point that out. So we're gonna jump into some of these drafts here and kind of give a couple of examples as to why that was the case. So this is game one. We're gonna jump over the bans a little bit because I don't think it's anything too out of the ordinary. Kalista opener, and then a classic counter into the Kalista opener is the Varus Ashe. Because of the range advantage, both of these champions have 600 range. I believe Kalista's 525, and they have a lot of lane suppression to actually counter the ability for the Kalista to kind of hop around. It's range disadvantage, and both of them can apply slows, and both of them can apply a ton of pressure to make sure the main strength of this Kalista is negated. Genji, they seem to have a prepared counter for this because they're going for the Rumble Flex. In this case, it ended up going support. And from my eyes, I actually don't see the matchup playing out like this, but it seems that Genji do, and they have like their own ways into dealing with it, right? The answer, you answer damage with damage, frankly. Varus Ashe has a ton of damage, but so does Rumble. It's some of the highest base damages in the entire game, where he's just known for that. That's his shtick. So they're basically raising the stakes on the bottom lane, right? And both teams kind of know this draft is all about bottom lane and stunting that as much as possible. And Fnatic are playing around it. They've given the Taliyah, and Genji are understanding that, acknowledging that, and they're rounding out their comp on the 4-5 with something really safe. Corki Cassante, right? Double super chill lanes, and Cassante is gonna be able to. It's a very bog standard pick in order to make sure things are stable on top side. And Fnatic do a good job by trying to punish that as much as possible. They understand they want to play for this Varus Ashe. They use Taliyah to facilitate it, and they have a winning matchup topside. It puts a lot of pressure on Keen in order to perform. Camille and Cassante, slow scaling, really solid. The only thing here, so let me backtrack. From a draft perspective, it's pretty solid. On paper, it's like, damn, you got winning lanes all over the place. You got a lot of pressure. The game is in your hands. It's yours to win, right? But the problem is, the output is like you multiply the setup you have from draft by the gameplay and your ability to execute. And the idea here is that like it's really hard in order to execute when you have the gameplay aspect where Genji is like, we can just negate lane, or we can just play our comp really, really well and understand what we need to do. And that's where things get awkward. And it's especially awkward with this sort of lane swap meta, because you're like, all of a sudden you have to draft around that potential, which is really annoying. And that's why sometimes these, like, this is a really unique drafting meta we have, because now you're like, okay, Camille wins against Cassante in isolation. Well, does Camille win against Cassante when they both have, when they're both below the poverty line? Like that kind of changes the game here a little bit, right? Then you would be like, okay, then Cassante's a little bit better now, and that's probably where Fnatic got thrown for a little bit of a loop. However, I don't want to disregard how interesting that is. Game 2, main thing I want to point out here is this Lulu ban. It's a little bit interesting. I think this prepares for their Lucian opener, right? They're probably responding a little bit with these Kalista Varus bans. It's still a little bit interesting because my guess is to mainly hedge against things like Aphelios Lulu 1-2 here when they open Lucian. So it makes sense, right? I just wanted to point that out. So they go for Lucian Millia opener. They break it up by going Draven Nami. This is interesting because the mindset could be that Genji thinks the Nami version of it is better, and then they take the Nami side, force them onto Milio, and then they play the Nami into Milio matchup. And then the way it goes essentially is that in lane, Nami fares a little bit better, and then you can choke out both sides without having to use the ban, and then gets you some good pressure there. And it's actually favorable for Draven Nami in this matchup because You take the Nami, you out sustain, and you have more kill pressure because the Draven provides so much, right? It's harder for Lucian to dash in because Draven can respond in kind. And then Genji lean on the K'Sante once more. And it's interesting because they want to use mid for R5. And I don't think it's because they want to counterpick mid per se. It's more so a lot of their priority picks. There's a lot of things they want to take. That's generally the reason the draft went like this, right? So because they want to take Nami on 1, they want to pick their Lucian counter pick on 2, and they prioritize K'Sante on 3. So it's not because they want to counter pick R5 mid on purpose. It is because there are too many things they need to pick because of the way the situation played out. So that is how it goes. And this is a unique pick for Genji. And this is where it gets spicy. This is what I mean by Genji responding in kind. They are the only team, I'm pretty sure, that is willing to pick the Kha'Zix like this so consistently. And Canyon is very confident on it. And I'll tell you for sure, the Kha'Zix into Xin Zhao matchup is pretty juicy for Kha'Zix post 6. Right? There's a little phase where Xin Zhao can fare better, but against a comp like this especially, it forces the hand of Fnatic to think more about being able to draft around the Kha'Zix. It warps the draft, right? It kind of forces this Poppy B5 because there's not much room for Fnatic to really draft around frontline anymore because they pick the first 3. That's arguably the most flexibility because mids are all the same. And they kind of invested all of that in the early phases, right? So because of that, I would still argue this Kha'Zix is relatively successful because their main frontliner is top lane, right? So they basically caught Fnatic lacking, for like a lack of a better word, right? And I think, the impact of this Kha'Zix is also hedging. It discourages the favorable K'Sante matchups that Fnatic potentially would have wanted to go. They could have won Camille again. They could have, maybe they wanted to go Gwen even. It hasn't been played much, but you can go with these creative matchups. You could go, you could have gone TF here, but if you go Kha'Zix, it discourages all of that because if you do that, your whole team's gonna get one shot, right? And that's so unique. They have such a strong understanding of this champion, and I think it goes to show. Game 3, right? Similar deal. It's not to discourage Fnatic at all. They're trying to force advantages wherever they can. Look at this. They think K'Sante is the problem. All right, let's nuke that thing. Let's get rid of it. Varus B1. I'm cool with it too. Genji's cool with it too. Apparently, they pick Lucian Nami, slam 1-2. They play again. Very volatile matchup. Draft's gonna go similar. So it's about whatever teams can come up with creative picks. This time, Fnatic. They try a different direction. They just blind Sion on 3. Very ambitious, very interesting, but, top lane pool is pretty small. I don't think there's too many champions that are being picked in Worlds right now in top lane. Every team just loves K'Sante, right? So the dynamic generally is, okay, blindable top lane because the game is about bottom lane. And then very important is isolation matchups, right? How to play these matchups in isolation. How bad can you mitigate against your matchup? And oh god, this is a rough one, right? Sion into Vayne, very, very hard to play. It just never gets better. It's bad early, it's bad mid, it's bad late, and it's a lot of these unique picks. That's what's the most important, right? It's the picks that teams that are willing to bust out or off meta picks, not even off meta, like unique picks that teams are willing to lean on that teams are not prepared for, because that's the unique thing about League and Draft. There's so many different options, and the viability of certain options increases with certain conditions in draft being met, and that's what makes it so cool and complicated to watch. And that's a prime example of what happened here. A lot of back and forth, a lot of adjustments from both sides. It's really cool, and then being able to see how the draft evolves is part of what makes drafting really fun. And I think this is a really good example of that. So just wanted to point that out to you guys today and kind of give you a highlight as to, even though it's a 3-0, I think it was a pretty high level draft, and I think it was really cool. So hopefully that was insightful, you guys, and hope you guys have a nice day.